Around the ages of 8 to 9, I lived in a little trailer with my abusive family. We had a large backyard that was part field and open to the woods. It was in rural Georgia. During this time, I had some strange occurrences happen to me that today I still can't explain. Since it's been so many years, my memory is hazy on some of it, but I remember distinct patterns. I remember when we first moved there, I was terribly afraid to be alone outdoors in our backyard. As soon as I noticed I was alone and my parents had gone back inside for their smoke break, I'd run to the front yard and then return when I heard them talking on the back porch. For some reason, I felt like I was being heavily watched, and I would be filled with a sense of dread. I thought I'd hear footsteps in the woods, but I would be told by my parents that it was just birds or deer. Several years later, my mother informed me that I told her once that there was an older man outside walking by our road. But when she looked, there wasn't anyone around. I had apparently seen this from my bedroom window that looked out to the front yard and road. I also used to sleep terribly. For several months, I'd wake up around 3 a.m. without any explanation. I used to brush it off and just go back to sleep, and just thought it was weird it was always the same time. And then I started feeling the strangest thing. As I was falling asleep at night, I'd feel my body lift from the bed. As soon as I dozed back into reality, it felt like I was let go and back onto the mattress. I'd shrugged this off as some hallucination caused by partial sleep. If it weren't for the fact one time, I distinctly remember waking up and feeling myself bounce onto the mattress and hearing the bed springs. It was horrifying. Even now, I don't want to believe it, and will try to come up with other answers to the mystery. I even had a nightmare once about a shadowed man, and I couldn't see his face or clothes, except that he wore a large brimmed hat and oversized boots. The scariest thing that's ever happened to me, though, I still can't find an explanation for. I find only relief that as years pass and the memory gets fuzzier, I can try to convince myself it was all a dream. I woke up at around 3 a.m. again, and this time I heard a voice. There was a deep, buzzing hum that sounded at intervals. It's hard to describe as anything that doesn't sound cartoonish, but I was horrified. It sounded like it was right outside my bedroom windows. And then, after that quieted, I heard another noise. This is going to sound ridiculous, but I can only describe it as a gargling, clicking noise. Like if a squirrel decided to imitate Perry the platypus. And it sounded like there was more than one, and it was somewhere in my room. I couldn't tell if it was right by my door or behind my back, watching me and communicating with each other. I was so afraid, I kept my eyes shut, pretending to be asleep and didn't move. I didn't know if it was aliens or a haunting, or an aliens with a haunting, but I couldn't go back to sleep for a while after that. I didn't move for at least another hour, and I didn't tell a soul for years. It was shortly thereafter I had a little breakdown. I tried to talk to my stepdad about the happenings once, but he disregarded it and kept telling me that ghosts weren't real and that I was dreaming. One night, all the paranoia and fear peaked, and I remember sitting in bed crying before I had to sleep, and begging with whatever thing was messing with me to leave me alone. Oddly enough, everything stopped after that. I can't recall any more paranormal occurrences that may have happened. After my mother got custody of my little brother and we could play outside together, I stopped feeling the dread too. I was in med school, which had a very old hospital. There were rumours that the well that was in an abandoned part of campus was haunted. I also heard that on certain days we could hear the spirits talking in the well. On inquiring, I found out that during the 1990s, there was an endemic of tuberculosis in that region. Relatives left the bodies of the deceased dead ones in hospital. Due to low-quality disposal facility, the bodies were disposed in the well. After a few days of disposal, there were loud growling sounds heard by people in the waiting area between the hospital and the well at night. For this purpose, a holy place/temple was built with the idol of God to balance the forces. A special ritual is performed at full moon night, as it was believed that God is much more powerful during that night. Thus, the ritual would just maintain that dominance of power of God. The only exception would be no moon night, during which the evil entities become dominant. On that night, we could hear them talking in the well. I didn't believe it as such. Fast forward to the present, it was the last day of med school. That night was the no moon night. We friends partied hard at night and got wasted. After that, at about 2 o'clock, one of my arsehole friends had an idea of listening to the spirits talk, so we went there. On reaching, we listened to some mumbling from the well. On reaching there, we literally heard, "Shh, the smell of earthly pleasure." Shit, we forgot that strong smell of whiskey was coming from us. The asshole friend asked, "Who are you?" Mistake. We heard the words, "Why don't you join us below? We'll talk." That moment, whiskey level of blood dropped to 0. That asshole then decided to pull a stunt. He had flowers which were blessed by the temple. He deliberately threw them in the well and yelled, "Fuck you!" Then we heard the most unnerving demonic scream of our life. We ran for our life. We also heard the watchman running to the well from the other side after listening to the scream. We ran to our rooms and couldn't sleep. On the next day, administration said that one watchman committed suicide in the well. I knew that wasn't suicide. We friends looked at each other, hugged and cried. One innocent person lost his life due to our foolish seek for thrill. Couldn't wipe that blood on our hands. May God mercy on all. I was 15 years old at the time, and my best friend and I were on the trampoline. We had been bouncing around, having ourselves a good time, like usual, and we were tuckered out after a couple of minutes. My parents were more strict than his, and didn't allow me to have a phone until I was older. This girl he liked had texted him, and he was replying to her on the trampoline, looking down. Approximately 40 feet above my neighbour's house, yes, like seriously close, hovered a UFO. It made no sound and moved about 20 miles an hour. It went over his roof and across the lake in front of my neighbour's house, across the highway, and then basically disappeared out of view. This is what it looked like. 7 balls of light, all about 10 feet from each other, in the shape of a triangle with nothing connecting them. The light I would describe as incandescent or more similar to the sun, not like an LED. Even ones that are meant to look incandescent, you can tell usually. It was a very rich, bright, warm light. It was extremely bright in the sense that it was light enough to shine in daylight, but didn't cast extra light onto me or my friend, or the trampoline. It seemed to travel basically straight, but going up at an angle by the time it went across the highway. It was over 200, maybe 400 feet in the air. It seemed to just slip away into the horizon. I was so utterly dumbfounded, I made no sound either and didn't alert my friend until the last moment. And by the time it was slipping away into the horizon, this is my biggest regret in life. He was right there. Do I personally believe it was aliens? I'm not sure. I have no clue, but I'm not making it up. And I think if it made even the slightest sound, I would probably have spoken up. But it was so silent, it was just there and gone. This happened about 10 years ago. I was about 20 years old, dating this guy from California. We lived in South Carolina at the time. He'd only lived in South Carolina a few months, so he wasn't familiar with the area. He had a job traveling to repair point-of-sale systems and retail stores. Because he grew up in Southern California, he really loved finding long country roads and just exploring the rural areas of South Carolina. It was pretty common for him to come home and pick me up, for us to go explore some new road he'd travelled for work. We lived in a very small town, and I looked forward to these adventures, just to get out of town. One summer night, we decided to go for a drive down one of his roads and towards Dillon. It's a typical summer night in the south. Clear skies and the air is thick and sticky, like after you take a long hot shower. We've been driving down this 2-lane country road for a few miles, deep in the middle of a southern pine forest. We pass a small church on the right and come out of the woods to an open field, where the road curves towards the right. In the curve, there's a dirt road on the left-hand side. My boyfriend decides this is a good spot to stop and have a smoke. He backs his truck into the dirt road so that the front end is facing across the main road into an open field. I can see behind us from the tail lights, there's a big gate blocking off the dirt road with a sign that says Rifle Club. Before he gets out of the truck, he leans over to give me a kiss, which turns into a longer kiss. I mean, we're on the side of the road in the dark. Why not? As we're kissing, I can't explain it. I felt like I was being watched, so I opened my eyes mid-kiss and looked out the front. Apparently, I stopped being as attentive to the kiss because he stopped and turned, asking what was wrong. I saw a flickering light ahead of us across the street in the field. At first, I suspected it was a light off of a radio tower or something. But as we watched, the light appeared to move. Sort of swayed a bit like someone was walking holding the light. Our first thoughts were that we had parked near some old farm we couldn't see, and the farmer was coming to chase us off. There was no fear, just sort of shock and curiosity as we watched. It was weird because it seemed to be moving closer to us, but at the same time, it still kind of looked like it was far away in the distance. While watching, I could also see the lights from the dash of the truck reflecting off the windshield, so I thought maybe it was a reflection. We rolled the windows down and stuck our head out of the truck and could still see the light. The light kept coming towards us until it got to about 15 feet away from the other side of the road. It stopped and went back the way it came. As soon as the light disappeared, we both felt the urgent need to leave. We took off the way we came, going back by the church and out towards the main highway. As we turn onto the main road, I see a sign that says to turn right to go to Bingham. That's when it hit me. That's when I knew exactly where we were and what we saw. As a child growing up in the area, there were many urban legends, Bingham's Light being one of them. I never truly believed it as a child. I thought it was just some old ghost story. We drove straight home that night and didn't go to sleep. The rest of the night we spent reading about Bingham's Light and other encounters. As soon as the sun came up, we drove back out to the dirt road where we parked the night before. We walked out to the field and we saw the light looking for any evidence of what we saw, but there was nothing. It didn't make sense to me. I wasn't sure if it was Bingham's Light because the stories all claim you see the light near railroad tracks. We decided to turn left of the dirt road and continue down the road the rest of the way just to see where it goes. Not even half a mile down the road, we cross what used to be railroad tracks. Still to this day, I'm unsure what we saw. Legend says a man back in the 1800s died on the railroad tracks. There's many different versions of the story, but that's the gist of it. Supposedly, if you go to the tracks, you can still see the light of his lantern. The show Unsolved Mysteries did an episode on Bingham's Light and explained the light as just swamp gas. We drove that area the next day in daylight, and I don't recall ever seeing any swampland near to the area we spotted the light. I've thought about going back out there several times, but the idea terrifies me. Maybe one day I'll get the nerve to go back. When I was 6 years old, my grandfather died. I was his first grandchild, and I was the only grandchild he ever got to meet, sadly. I don't have many memories of him. The only ones I can remember are visiting him towards the end of his life in hospital. When I was about 10, my cousin was born, and he was born to my oldest uncle and his wife. A couple months after he was born, he was christened, and all of my family members went to the church. Midway through the ceremony, one of us spotted a huge brown and orange butterfly that had landed on the stained glass window of the church. Once one of us had seen it, we couldn't help but acknowledge its piercing presence. All of a sudden, the butterfly flew off the window and started moving towards my uncle and his newborn child. The butterfly landed on my uncle's shoulder, to which my uncle cracked a smile to, and then landed on my uncle's wife's head, messing up her hair. Then it sat on the edge of my cousin's crib and lingered for a couple of seconds. All my uncles and aunties exchanged glances and smirked to one another because they all knew who it was. It was my grandfather. The butterfly went back to the window where it stayed for the remainder of the church service. My grandmother said the way he messed up my uncle's wife's hair was exactly like my grandfather's humour, and the way he landed on my uncle's shoulder as if to gratify all of his hard work throughout the years and the start of his new family showed how much he appreciated his family. We still talk about the butterfly years later, seeking out every brown and orange butterfly to try and pin the evergreen presence of my grandfather on it. I'm not a religious person at all, but something about the butterfly makes me feel a strong sense of reassurance that our loved ones are still with us and are living on through small cracks of nature. All this UFO stuff that I've seen recently made me remember something that happened to me around 2 years ago. I honestly don't know what it was. I just moved this memory so far in my head that I forgot about it. I was riding my motorcycle coming home from a trip. I took a shortcut via a forest and a heap from the mine, like all the extra material they got from mining coal, and then put it all in one pile. I rode this road more than 1,000 times before on my bicycle, my motorcycle, and sometimes when I just made a barbecue with my friends on the heap. It was around 9 or 10 p.m. I don't remember, but it was already dark, but not so much that I needed headlights to see, but I kept them on anyways. I was already on the upper side of the heap. Then my phone and my Garmin that I had mounted on my handlebars turned off, literally in an instant. Like somebody would just cut the battery wires to them. And my intercom and my helmet that I used to listen to the radio also turned off. Even my speedometer. I had fancy electronic aftermarket one put on. It turned off, just like somebody had cut the power lines. My motorcycle started to feel wired like gas. Was ending it. Was popping. And had very little power, but was still running. I remember that tank was not full, but not empty, but it still acted weird. Then there was light. Not much, but something like a Jeep or something that turned on their extra light bar right behind me. At that moment, I was literally shitting and pissing myself. I was so scared that somebody would come kill me or rape me or do something worse. I just kind of twisted the throttle open to the max and rode around 60-degree slope right into the denser part of the heap that was filled with trees and bushes. To be honest, I don't really remember the rest of my trip home. I remember that I smashed my mirror and cut my hand over a tree branch and rode so hard that when I got home, the oil was so hot that the dipstick thermometer was off the scale and oil got really, really black. To this day, I don't know what the hell was that. Maybe this all of a coincidence, and someone was just staring up their Jeep on the heap, since sometimes there are off-road enthusiasts riding their cars there. So me and my friend TJ back in 2018 used to do a lot of cryptic ghost hunting, and especially because where we're from, there's a lot of stories of areas with crazy history. An example is the woods a block from my house that has stone steps in the middle of it, completely out of the way of everything. Basically, long story short, the stairs were from a church that burnt down long ago. And rumour has it, people died in that fire, and that's why the woods are now haunted. Me and my friend B saw some shit in those woods too. But with this image in your head, now you can understand that the area has a lot of paranormal activity. Now, back to the main story. Me and TJ one night found out the Conjuring House, Buryville. It's like a 20-minute drive from us, so we decided to check it out. It was about 2 a.m. when we started driving there, and a lot of weird shit started to happen when we got to the first road on the way to the house. For a reference to how creepy this area was, it was practically out in the middle of the sticks, barely any streetlights. And lastly, the energy was the strangest. It felt like we were being watched all the way to the house. When the GPS said about 3 minutes away from the house, TJ's radio started glitching, repeating the chorus of R.I.P. by Joji. Chorus, me and you and I would die for you, do or die for you, suicide for you, R.I.P. I would die 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 for you, I would die for you, I would die for you, I would die for you. When it came on. Needless to say, that the vibe got a lot darker after that. And when we actually arrived, when we got there, not much happened until we were about to leave. The vibe was growing worse the longer we stayed. And then TJ heard something, so we left because the energy was something different. As we're leaving, the GPS quickly made us turn to a road different from the way we came. As soon as we were approaching the original entrance to the street of the Conjuring House, at the time, we didn't think much of it because we were just trying to leave the area because of the way it was making us feel. This road was a lot creepier than the others because of how it brought us directly into the middle of the woods. Even some parts weren't paved, if I'm remembering correctly, with really weird looking houses spaced apart. Well, as we're going down the road, I look down at my phone and in that second, TJ starts punching my arm, yelling, "Look up, bro, what the fuck?" And as I looked up, the strangest things I've ever seen in my life jumps across the road like 5 feet away from the car and into the woods at the speed of a fucking cheetah. To give you guys a better idea of what it looked like, first of all, it was as tall as a kangaroo, and I mean the tall ones. The thing had to be 7 feet. Second, it was jumping in medium-sized jumps. Not sure what the word for the movement is, but quick, how a gear works. That's how smooth and fast the thing's ledge touched the ground, propelled forward and repeated. Like in the 4 seconds it took to drive the car to where it was on the road, it was like hundreds of feet away into the woods. Lastly, the most amazing but strange thing about it was its actual appearance. It looked like moving energy. A bundle of trees moving together in the shape of this animal-looking thing, and its odd colours were crazy. It was a combination of neon brown, neon dark green, neon orange, and some other less noticeable colours that sort of filled in the rest of its shape as it was taken. As we drove by, we freaked out, of course, and talked about the whole thing the ride home to try to make sense of what we saw. We even tried to find the road we were on that night on 3 separate occasions. After that, to see if we could maybe see it again, but we were never told or found that road again. That night changed my life because I never thought I'd see something like that so close. But since then, I've been trying to find the answers. Hi, my name is Turtlebox1, and I'm camping in my living room on an inflatable mattress near my AC due to the PNW heat. I'm across from the hallway to the front door. My boyfriend left for late night food, and I'm headed to bed. Naturally, I'm scrolling Facebook when I see a white figure under the phone. As I'm holding it a bit up in the air and under it could see if someone came through the door. Assuming I was seeing things, I lowered my phone and said, "Honey, did you forget something?" and stared at the white figure. My cat got startled and ran to hide, and the figure turned and stepped towards the door. There's about a foot between the hallway and the door, so it was out of view. The door didn't open. I didn't hear the lock turn. Texted my boyfriend. He sent me a Snapchat message with a pic of the drive-thru he was sitting in, 10 minutes away from the apartment. We have no roommates. About a year and a half ago, my boyfriend and I were in a different apartment. I was playing video games on the bed, facing the same wall the door was on. He walked into the room in a neon yellow sweatshirt I know he doesn't own. I say, "One sec," as I get to a safe spot to pause and see what he needs, and he patiently stands there. Not out of the ordinary. I pause and look over. I'm transfixed on the sweatshirt before he turns to leave. About 1 second after he steps out of view, I hear the kitchen sink. It was too far away for him to feasibly have reached it so quickly. As I'm sitting there confused, I hear footsteps as he approaches and enters the room. Wearing normal clothes, I asked about the sweatshirt, and he said he doesn't know what I'm talking about, and that he wasn't in there. I insisted someone was, and he questioned what they looked like. I can picture his body and head, but no face. I was focused on the sweatshirt. Before that, 2.5 years ago, we're sitting on my boyfriend's bed. I'm fairly religious, and he was just becoming so. I tell him something feels wrong and asked if we could pray together. He agrees, and I just froze. I felt something, sensed something dark there. With a hand on his shoulder. I freaked out, and later, after the fact, he was brushing his teeth shirtless and noticed 3 long scratches, fresh, down the back of his shoulder like claws. Now, I'm inclined because of my religious upbringing to think a demon at the oldest encounter. But I pretty much don't think labels are the best idea because I'm just scared. Something or some things are watching me. Does anyone know anything here? Does this sound familiar to you? This happened a while ago, but I'd really like to share it. It was about 10 years ago, my buddy and I were driving from New Jersey to Chicago. We were making the trip overnight as to avoid traffic. I honestly couldn't tell you exactly where we were, but it was somewhere in Pennsylvania. We were heading west, but not quite to Pittsburgh yet. It was like 2 or 3 in the morning. The sky is the clearest I've ever seen in my life. I felt like I could see every single star in the sky. There's nobody on the road with us, and we have nothing but trees on both sides of the road. Literally out of nowhere, a blue orb appeared. It wasn't very large, maybe the size of a car. It hovered in front of our car above the road. It was emitting very bright blue lights, which is why I'm just calling it a blue orb. It appeared out of nowhere and seemed to maintain a very precise distance in front of our car. It wasn't getting closer or farther. It did this for maybe 10 seconds, 5 seconds. I'm not sure. We were both asking each other what the fuck we were looking at. After that time, it shoots straight up extremely fast. And just like that, it was gone. I don't know if it was aliens. I don't know what the hell it was. I don't tell the story often because I sound so far-fetched. I just wanted to share it. I hope you guys enjoy it. This is 100% true. No drugs or anything like that. We both saw it. It's probably the only event in my life I cannot possibly think of an explanation. Okay, so I was a couple years out of high school. By this time, the house was kind of set up as a duplex, which meant I pretty much had the upstairs to myself. Now, we have no documentation of this, but the family generally believed the house was part of the Underground Railroad. The timeline and area lends itself to it, as well as the room dimensions that don't add up along with usually deep walls. So I was rearranging my books in a built-in bookcase. I shoved a book back, making a knock against the back wall, which to my surprise was responded to by a rapid knock knock, pause, slow, knock, knock. Call me a coward, but I decided to finish the books later and went to watch TV instead. Now, the reason I used EVP flare was because around the same time I was having trouble sleeping, which was a strange thing in itself, but not really something I can easily put into words, or more compelling experience than simply saying strange dreams and feelings. So I ended up using this sleep app that was supposed to help you with sleep habits. Part of it was recording you sleep to help with identifying REM sleep. I quit using the app after a week when I started hearing voices whispering as I slept. Unfortunately, too quiet to really understand, other than to say there seemed to be at least 2, and maybe as many as 4 voices at certain points. Another experience, praying is a very private thing to me, more akin to meditation and self-reflection. That being said, I was in my room, eyes closed, praying, when someone began tugging at my arm. Now, family knew praying was very personal to me, so I was angry that they would intrude. So I ignored the tug and continued, only to have the tugging return more insistent. So I opened my eyes and whipped my head around and angrily asked, "What?" And of course, you all know, no one was there. I was completely alone in my room. The basement was really an old root cellar that had been dug out over the years. There were 3 rooms and what equated to little more than a crawl space that was never dug out under half the house. I'll mention in the crawl space there was a lot of trash and beer bottles, but disturbingly, also funeral vases, and yes, 2 that you could see, urns. Now, crazy or not, we never messed with them and left them alone. Didn't want to disturb things and make it worse. The back room and front room were okay. You could definitely feel something watching you, but the thing seemed confined to the middle room close to the opening of the crawl space. I have a super strange story about the basement that I'll save, for now. One of the few times I seriously scared, you got the feeling the thing in the basement wanted to hurt you. But to be honest, aside from a few small scratches, welts and bruises, you couldn't explain after being down there. It seemed to be limited in strength, I guess. And it was the basement and easy to avoid. The second was a woman we ended up calling the nanny. She actually seemed to be helpful. She would close windows in rainstorms before you even got to them, turned off burners on the stove and cover boiling pots. I saw her twice. My sister saw her a handful of times. She said she would catch the nanny sitting in the corner of her room, which would eventually be my bedroom and had a sealed off access to the old attic, out of her peripheral vision in the rocking chair that would rock slowly. As well as saying she would often wake up on cold nights to a woman pulling the covers up or even putting another blanket on the bed. Our mother would always confirm when this was or wasn't her the next morning, and often it wasn't her. Again, cliche I know, but when I saw her, she had a long brownish dress and pulled up hair. Very late 1800s, early turn of the century. We called her the nanny because she was very active around the house. She seemed the most centered in the back room upstairs, which over the years had been converted into a kitchen, a study, a storage room, and back into a kitchen. But that was originally when the house was built, the maid's quarters that connected to the children's rooms and had a back staircase to the downstairs kitchen. Lastly, and this is where I might lose some of you, was the cat. Quite simply, it was a cat. There's no other way to describe it. It seemed to be a small animal that acted like a cat would. Though my dad took years to admit it, more about that in later experiences if you all want, he would eventually tell us the cat would jump on him, and he could feel it as well as see his clothes and chair move as it laid on him. I personally saw the leather on chair shift and sink as some invisible thing jumped on the arm of the chair and climbed onto the back of it to rest behind his head. My oldest sister said she often felt it wrapping around her legs as she did dishes, only to look down and see nothing. One of the most interesting stories about the cat, my folks got a new large sectional couch. Only my sister, me and my mom were home. We unpacked it and set it up. We sat there and lazily watched the cats playing in the packing it had come in. The paper and wrap and cardboard moving and shaking, when it suddenly occurred to me our cats were up. We had locked them in the bathroom before we started unpacking the couch to keep them out the way. I looked at my mom and said, "Wait, what's playing in the packing?" And again, she simply smirked and said, "Just picking up on that, huh?"